The cattle car jerked to a violent stop after 3 days of travel, and Lieutenant Ingrid Hoffmann pressed her face against the small barred window, trying to see their destination. Around her, 47 other German military women shifted anxiously in the cramped space, their uniforms dirty and their faces hollow with exhaustion. "Where are we?" whispered Sergeant Anna Klein, a signals operator who had been captured during the collapse of the Western Front. Through the window, Ingrid could see guard towers and barbed wire fencing, but something seemed different from the prison camps described in Nazi propaganda. The buildings looked sturdy and well-maintained, not the crude wooden shacks she had expected. "It's an American prison camp," Ingrid replied grimly. "Prepare yourselves for what we've been told to expect." The propaganda had been clear. American captors would subject German prisoners to deliberate starvation, brutal interrogations, and deliberate humiliation designed to break their spirit. As Wehrmacht auxiliaries, they had been taught that capture by Americans meant a slow death through systematic cruelty. The heavy doors of the cattle car slid open with a grinding screech, and American soldiers appeared outside. Ingrid tensed, expecting shouting and violence, but instead heard something that caught her completely off guard. "Ladies, please step down carefully. Watch your footing. The platform is wet." The voice belonged to a tall American sergeant who was actually offering his hand to help the German women down from the train car. His uniform was clean, his demeanor professional, and most surprisingly, he spoke careful German with obvious concern for their safety. "I am Sergeant Williams," he announced to the assembled German prisoners. "You are now at Camp Clinton in Mississippi. You will be processed, assigned quarters, and given an orientation regarding camp procedures." Ingrid exchanged glances with Anna. This wasn't the brutal reception they had been conditioned to expect. The American guards were armed but relaxed, their weapons lowered, treating the German women more like refugees than dangerous enemies. "Sergeant Williams," Ingrid said in careful English, "what will happen to us?" The American looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Ma'am, you'll be housed according to Geneva Convention standards, provided with adequate food and medical care, and given opportunities for work and recreation until the war ends, and you can be repatriated." "But we are German military personnel," Anna interjected through Ingrid's translation. "Your enemies." Sergeant Williams nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am, you were our enemies in wartime, but you're prisoners of war now, which means you have rights under international law that we're obligated to respect." As they were marched toward the camp entrance, Ingrid noticed details that contradicted everything she had been told about American prisoner camps. The grounds were clean and well-maintained. Guards walked casually rather than aggressively. Most disturbing to her preconceptions, she could hear voices from inside the camp, German voices engaged in what sounded like normal conversation rather than cries of despair. "This feels wrong," Anna whispered. "Where is the brutality we were warned about?" Before Ingrid could respond, they passed through the main gate and saw something that made every German woman stop in amazement. In the camp courtyard, German prisoners of war were playing soccer, while American guards watched with casual interest. The prisoners looked healthy, their uniforms clean, their demeanor relaxed rather than terrorized. "My God," whispered Corporal Weber, a communications specialist from Bavaria. "They look normal, human." Sergeant Williams noticed their confusion. "Ladies, I know this may be different from what you expected, but Camp Clinton operates according to American military standards and international law. Your safety and well-being are our responsibility." As they approached the processing building, Ingrid felt her worldview beginning to shift. Everything the Nazi regime had taught them about American cruelty toward prisoners was being contradicted by what she witnessed with her own eyes. But the greatest shock was yet to come. Nothing could have prepared these German women for what awaited them inside the camp facilities. Before we discover what these German prisoners experienced in their first hours at Camp Clinton, tell us where you're watching from today. We love connecting with our global community of viewers who share our fascination with these remarkable untold stories of humanity during wartime. Or, inside the processing building, Ingrid and her fellow German prisoners faced their first real test of American intentions. They were directed to a large room where several American military personnel, including a female officer, waited behind desks loaded with paperwork and supplies. "I am Captain Mary Rodriguez," announced the American woman in fluent German. "I will be your primary liaison during your time at Camp Clinton. Each of you will be interviewed individually to establish your identity, rank, and any special medical needs. Ingrid was called first, her legs trembling as she approached Captain Rodriguez's desk. Every Nazi training session had warned that American interrogations would involve psychological torture designed to break German resistance. "Please sit down," Captain Rodriguez said gently, indicating a wooden chair. "Would you like some water? You've had a long journey." The offer of refreshment caught Ingrid completely off guard. Yes, thank you." An American soldier brought her a clean glass of cold water, and Ingrid drank gratefully while Captain Rodriguez reviewed her paperwork with professional efficiency. Lieutenant Ingrid Hoffmann, Communications Corps, captured near Aachen on March 15th. "Is this information correct?" "Yes," Ingrid replied carefully. "Any injuries or medical conditions we should know about?" "No, Captain." "Excellent. Now, I need to inform you of your rights as a prisoner of war under the Geneva Convention." For the next 10 minutes, Captain Rodriguez explained in detail the protections guaranteed to prisoners of war: adequate food, medical care, correspondence privileges, recreational activities, and protection from mistreatment. Most remarkably, she handed Ingrid a printed copy of these rights in German. "You'll be housed in Barracks 7 with 15 other German military women. Meals are served 3 times daily in the main dining hall. Male privileges begin after your 2-week quarantine period." "Quarantine?" Ingrid asked nervously. "Standard medical precaution for all new arrivals. We want to ensure you're healthy and not carrying any communicable diseases. During quarantine, you'll receive orientation about camp procedures and have access to recreational facilities." As Ingrid was escorted from the processing room, she passed Anna, who was entering for her interview. "They're treating us like human beings," Ingrid whispered in amazement. The walk to Barracks 7 revealed more surprises. They passed a library where German prisoners were reading books and newspapers, a medical clinic where American doctors were treating German patients. Most shocking of all, a canteen where prisoners could purchase small luxuries with tokens earned through camp work. "This is impossible," whispered Sergeant Klein as they reached their assigned barracks. "This contradicts everything we were taught about American brutality." The barracks itself was another revelation. Clean wooden buildings with real beds, mattresses, and blankets. Windows with glass panes rather than bars. Individual lockers for personal belongings. The space was simple but dignified, more like military quarters than a prison cell. "Ladies," called an American corporal, "you'll find basic toiletries and clean clothing in your lockers. Dinner is served at 1800 hours in the main hall. Tomorrow morning, you'll begin orientation with other German personnel." After the Americans left, the German women explored their quarters in stunned silence. Each bed had clean sheets, a pillow, and warm blankets. The lockers contained soap, toothbrushes, towels, and fresh undergarments. "Anna," Ingrid called softly, "look at this." She had discovered something that challenged her understanding of prison camps entirely. At the end of the barracks was a communal washroom with individual shower stalls, mirrors, and, most incredibly, hot running water. "Hot water?" Anna whispered in disbelief. "In a prison camp?" Corporal Weber turned on one of the faucets and steam immediately began rising from the basin. "Not just hot, properly hot. When did you last have a hot bath, Ingrid?" Ingrid couldn't remember. During the final months of the war, even German military facilities had lacked adequate heating and hot water. The idea that American prison camps provided such luxuries to enemy prisoners seemed impossible. "There are clean towels," observed another prisoner, touching the soft fabric with amazement. "And real soap, not the ersatz soap we've been using for months." As evening approached and the German women prepared for their first meal as American prisoners, Ingrid faced a troubling realization. Everything the Nazi regime had taught them about American treatment of prisoners was proving false. If they had lied about this, what else had been propaganda rather than truth? "Ingrid," Anna said quietly as they walked toward the dining hall, "what if we've been wrong about everything?" The question would haunt Ingrid through the coming weeks as she discovered just how dramatically American reality differed from Nazi propaganda. The dining hall at Camp Clinton shattered every expectation Ingrid had about prisoner treatment. Long tables filled with German POWs, eating from real plates with metal utensils, engaged in normal conversation while American guards supervised from a respectful distance. "Form a line here, ladies," directed an American cook, a friendly man in his 50s who spoke broken German. "We have pot roast tonight with vegetables and bread." Ingrid accepted her tray and watched in amazement as the cook ladled generous portions of meat, potatoes, carrots and green beans onto her plate. The bread was white and fresh, the coffee real rather than the ersatz substitutes she'd grown accustomed to during the war's final months. "This is more food than I've seen in months," whispered Anna, as they found seats at a table with other German military women who had been at the camp longer. "You'll get used to it," said Obergefreiter Mueller, a signals specialist who had been captured 3 months earlier. "They feed us the same rations as American soldiers, 3 meals daily, plus access to the canteen for additional items." "But why?" asked Sergeant Klein. "We're prisoners, enemy soldiers." Mueller smiled grimly. "That's what we all asked. The Americans have a saying, 'You catch more flies with honey than vinegar.' They believe well-treated prisoners cause fewer problems and provide better intelligence cooperation." "Intelligence cooperation?" Ingrid's voice sharpened. "Nothing treasonous," Mueller clarified quickly. "Basic information about German army organization, equipment capabilities, things they can verify from other sources. In exchange, they provide privileges beyond basic Geneva Convention requirements." As they ate, Ingrid observed the dynamic between American guards and German prisoners. The guards were alert but not aggressive, maintaining professional distance while allowing normal social interaction among the prisoners. "Fräulein Müller," Ingrid said carefully, "have you experienced any mistreatment, any attempts at coercion or punishment?" "The opposite. Last month I became ill with pneumonia. They moved me to the camp hospital immediately, provided the same medical care as American personnel, and allowed me to recover completely before returning to general population." Anna leaned forward. "What about interrogations? Pressure to reveal military secrets?" "They interviewed each of us once for basic information. Name, rank, unit, capture circumstances. Nothing beyond Geneva Convention requirements. No pressure, no threats, no punishment for refusing to answer." After dinner, the German prisoners were allowed recreation time. Ingrid watched in fascination as her fellow POWs played cards, read books from the camp library, and even engaged in organized sports activities. The atmosphere was more like a military base than a prison camp. "Lieutenant Hoffmann," called an American voice behind her. She turned to see Sergeant Williams approaching with a clipboard. "Yes, Sergeant? Tomorrow you'll begin orientation with Lieutenant Patricia Hayes, our camp education officer. She'll explain work assignments, recreational programs, and correspondence procedures." "Educational programs?" "We offer English language classes, vocational training, and academic courses. Many German prisoners use their time here to develop new skills for post-war employment." That evening, as Ingrid prepared for bed in clean sheets with hot water available for washing, she faced a profound internal conflict. Everything she had been taught about American barbarity was being contradicted by daily experience. "Anna," she said quietly as they settled into their beds, "what if the Americans aren't the monsters we were told they were? Then what does that say about everything else we believed?" The question hung in the air as Ingrid tried to sleep. If American treatment of prisoners was humane rather than brutal, if their guards were professional rather than sadistic, if their camps provided dignity rather than degradation, what other Nazi propaganda had been lies? Outside the barracks, she could hear the sound of German voices engaged in normal conversation, the footsteps of guards making their rounds without urgency or aggression, and the general atmosphere of a well-ordered, peaceful facility. For the first time since her capture, Ingrid felt something she hadn't expected to feel as a prisoner of war. Safe. But with that safety came disturbing questions about the regime she had served and the war she had fought. 2 weeks into her captivity, Ingrid faced her most challenging moment when Lieutenant Patricia Hayes, the American education officer, made an offer that would force her to confront everything she had believed about the war. "Lieutenant Hoffmann, your English is excellent, and your communication skills are impressive," Hayes said during their morning meeting. "I'd like to offer you a position assisting with camp administration, translating documents, helping with prisoner orientation, facilitating communication between American staff and German personnel." Ingrid felt her stomach tighten. "You want me to collaborate with American forces? I want you to help ensure your fellow prisoners receive proper treatment and understand their rights. This isn't collaboration against Germany. It's advocacy for German prisoners' welfare." The distinction troubled Ingrid deeply. Nazi training had been clear that any cooperation with enemy forces constituted treason, regardless of circumstances or intentions. What would this position entail? Translating camp regulations, medical forms, and correspondence procedures, helping new arrivals understand American policies, serving as liaison between German prisoners and camp administration when issues arise. Lieutenant Hayes paused, studying Ingrid's expression. I should mention, this position comes with additional privileges, private quarters, access to expanded library resources, and increased correspondence allowances. And if I refuse, then you continue as a regular prisoner with all standard Geneva Convention protections. No punishment, no retaliation. This is an opportunity, not an obligation. That evening, Ingrid discussed the offer with Anna and other German prisoners she had come to trust. It's a trap, insisted Sergeant Klein. They want to turn you into a collaborator, then use you to gather intelligence about other prisoners. But Ingrid, Anna countered, look around us. They're already treating us better than our own army treated us during the final months. Maybe they genuinely want to improve conditions. Obergefreiter Müller offered a different perspective. I've been watching the Americans for months. Their behavior is consistent. They follow rules strictly, treat prisoners with professional respect, and seem genuinely committed to Geneva Convention standards. That doesn't mean we should betray our country, Klein argued. Is helping German prisoners receive better treatment really betrayal? Ingrid asked quietly. The debate continued late into the night, reflecting deeper questions about loyalty, survival, and moral responsibility in impossible circumstances. The next morning, Ingrid made her decision. Lieutenant Hayes, I'll accept the position with one condition. What condition? I want written assurance that my role involves only prisoner welfare advocacy, not intelligence gathering or propaganda activities. Hayes smiled and handed her a typed document. Already prepared. This contract specifies your duties exclusively as prisoner advocate and translator for administrative purposes. Ingrid's new position provided insights into camp operations that amazed her. American record-keeping was meticulous. Every prisoner's medical needs, dietary requirements, correspondence privileges, and recreational activities were carefully documented and regularly reviewed. We have monthly inspections by Red Cross representatives, Hayes explained during Ingrid's first week as translator. Every aspect of prisoner treatment must meet international standards. What happens if violations are discovered? Immediate correction and documentation. Camp commanders who violate Geneva Convention standards face court-martial and career termination. As Ingrid translated orientation materials for newly arrived German prisoners, she witnessed their same shocked reactions to American camp conditions. Clean facilities, adequate food, respectful treatment, recreational opportunities, and medical care that often exceeded what German soldiers had received in their own army. Lieutenant, she asked Hayes during a quiet moment, why do Americans treat prisoners so well? Most armies consider captives a burden to be managed with minimal resources. Hayes considered the question carefully. Because we believe that how we treat our enemies reflects who we are as a people. If we become brutal toward prisoners, we become the very thing we're fighting against. That evening, Ingrid wrote her first letter home since capture, using expanded correspondence privileges earned through her new position. But as she tried to describe her experiences at Camp Clinton, she realized the fundamental problem she faced. How could she tell her family that American barbarians were treating German prisoners with more dignity and care than the German government had shown its own people during the war's final desperate months? The truth was becoming clear, but it was a truth that challenged everything she had been raised to believe. 3 months into her captivity, Ingrid experienced the most profound challenge to her beliefs when the camp's Red Cross inspection revealed something that shattered her remaining faith in Nazi propaganda about American brutality. Lieutenant Hoffmann, would you assist me with translation during today's inspection? Asked Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Red Cross representative who conducted monthly reviews of prisoner conditions. As they toured the camp facilities, Dr. Warren documented every aspect of prisoner treatment with professional thoroughness. The medical clinic, dining facilities, recreation areas, sleeping quarters, and work programs all received detailed examination. What do you observe about prisoner health and morale? Dr. Warren asked Ingrid as they interviewed German POWs. They appear healthy, well-fed, and content is perhaps too strong a word, but they show no signs of mistreatment or systematic abuse. And how does this compare to conditions you experienced in German military service? Ingrid paused, reluctant to answer honestly. During the final months of the war, German soldiers often had inadequate food, limited medical care, and poor living conditions due to resource shortages. Dr. Warren made careful notes while conducting interviews with German prisoners, asking about medical treatment, food quality, recreational opportunities, and any complaints about American conduct. Obergefreiter Müller. Doctor. Warren asked through Ingrid's translation. Have you experienced any violations of Geneva Convention standards? The opposite, Muller replied firmly. When I was hospitalized with pneumonia, I received better medical care than I ever received in the German army. The doctors treated me exactly as they would treat an American soldier. Similar responses came from every prisoner interviewed. No reports of brutality, inadequate food, medical neglect, or systematic mistreatment. Instead, consistent accounts of professional, respectful treatment that exceeded minimum Geneva Convention requirements. But the real shock came when Dr. Warren shared her inspection findings with camp administrators in Ingrid's presence. Camp Clinton receives the highest rating for prisoner treatment standards, Dr. Warren announced to Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, the camp commander. Your facilities and procedures exceed Geneva Convention requirements in every category. Thank you, Dr. Warren. We work hard to maintain proper standards. I have one concern, however. Some prisoners report feeling guilty about receiving better treatment as American prisoners than they experienced as German soldiers. This creates psychological distress that may require counseling support. Lieutenant Colonel Anderson nodded seriously. We've noticed this issue. Many German prisoners struggle with the realization that their own government provided them with inferior conditions compared to what we provide enemy captives. After Dr. Warren departed, Ingrid found herself alone with Lieutenant Hayes, grappling with implications she couldn't ignore. Lieutenant Hayes, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Why do Americans provide such excellent care for enemy prisoners when your own propaganda could easily justify harsh treatment? Hayes considered the question carefully. Because maintaining our moral standards isn't conditional on our enemy's behavior. If we compromise our values in response to Nazi brutality, then they've succeeded in making us like them. That evening, Ingrid sat in her private quarters, a privilege earned through her administrative work, writing a letter she knew she might never send. How could she tell her family that American prison camps provided German prisoners with better living conditions than German citizens had experienced during the war's final years? Anna, she confided to her friend during evening recreation, I'm beginning to understand something terrible. What? The Americans aren't treating us well to manipulate us or gather intelligence. They're treating us well because that's who they are. Their respect for human dignity isn't propaganda. It's genuine principle. Anna was quiet for a long moment. And what does that tell us about the people we served? Ingrid had no answer, but the question would haunt her as she faced the growing realization that everything she had believed about the moral superiority of the German cause was built on lies. The truth was becoming undeniable, but accepting it meant acknowledging that she had fought for the wrong side in a war between civilization and barbarism. Subscribe to follow this extraordinary journey to its stunning conclusion and discover how these German prisoners grappled with the life-changing realization that their enemies had proven more humane than their own leaders. 6 months after her capture, Ingrid stood in the camp's communication center, translating the most devastating news she had ever encountered. American radio broadcasts were reporting the liberation of Nazi concentration camps, and the details were too horrific to comprehend. Lieutenant Hoffmann, said Lieutenant Hayes quietly, we're receiving reports about German camps for civilian prisoners. The details are disturbing. We want German POWs to hear this information from fellow Germans rather than from American sources. Ingrid's hands trembled as she read the intelligence reports. Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald, names that would haunt history, places where her own government had committed atrocities that defied human understanding. This can't be accurate, she whispered. These numbers, mass murder on this scale, it's impossible. I'm afraid it's very real, Hayes replied gently. Allied forces are documenting everything. The evidence is overwhelming. That evening, Ingrid faced the most difficult task of her life, translating these reports for her fellow German prisoners. The camp's main hall fell silent as she read aloud about systematic extermination, medical experiments, and industrial-scale murder conducted by the regime they had served. 6 million Jews, she read, her voice breaking, plus millions of other civilians, Poles, Russians, disabled individuals, political prisoners, all murdered by German forces while we fought what we believed was a noble war. The reaction among German prisoners was immediate and devastating. Some refused to believe the reports, insisting they were American propaganda. Others wept openly, understanding finally why American soldiers had shown such restraint and humanity toward German captives. How could we not have known? Asked Anna, tears streaming down her face. Obergefreiter Müller, always the pragmatist, provided the terrible answer. We didn't know because we didn't want to know. The signs were there. People disappearing, trains going to camps we never questioned, policies we accepted without examination. In the days that followed, American camp administrators made an unprecedented decision. They arranged for German prisoners to view film documentation from liberated concentration camps, believing that confronting the truth was essential for Germany's future. Ingrid watched in horror as American cameras revealed the reality of Nazi genocide. Skeletal survivors, mass graves, gas chambers designed for efficient murder, medical facilities where human beings had been used for experiments. Now you understand, Lieutenant Hayes said after the screening, why American forces have been so determined to treat German prisoners according to Geneva Convention standards. We wanted to prove that civilization and barbarism are choices, not inevitabilities. That night, Ingrid wrote letters she had been unable to write for months. Letters acknowledging that she had fought for a regime that represented everything evil in human nature, while being captured by forces that had maintained their humanity even toward enemies who had lost theirs. The contrast between American prison camps and German concentration camps wasn't just about different policies. It was about different concepts of human worth and dignity. 1 year after her capture, as Germany's surrender became official, Ingrid stood in the camp assembly hall listening to Lieutenant Colonel Anderson address the German prisoners for the final time before repatriation began. Ladies and gentlemen, your war is over. Many of you will return to Germany to help rebuild your nation. Others may choose to remain in America and start new lives. Either way, you carry with you the experience of what respectful treatment looks like, even between former enemies. Ingrid thought about the transformation she had witnessed in herself and her fellow prisoners. Women who had arrived expecting brutalization had instead received dignity, medical care, education, and the opportunity to maintain self-respect even in captivity. Lieutenant Hoffmann, Colonel Anderson continued, would you share your perspective with your fellow prisoners about what you've experienced here? Ingrid rose, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. 1 year ago, we arrived expecting to be brutalized by barbaric Americans. Instead, we discovered that our captors maintained higher standards of human decency than our own leadership had shown toward millions of innocent people. She paused, looking at the faces of German women who had shared this transformative experience. We learned that hot baths, clean towels, adequate food, and respectful treatment aren't luxuries. They're basic human rights that civilized societies provide even to their enemies. What will you tell people when you return to Germany? Asked Sergeant Klein. I'll tell them the truth, that American soldiers proved it's possible to win a war without losing your humanity. That treating prisoners with dignity makes you stronger, not weaker. That the difference between civilization and barbarism is how you treat people who can't defend themselves. Dr. Warren, making her final Red Cross inspection, approached Ingrid with a remarkable document. Lieutenant, this is our complete report on Camp Clinton. Would you be willing to help translate it into German for distribution in occupied Germany? The report documented every aspect of prisoner treatment over the past year: medical care statistics, educational programs, recreational activities, correspondence records, and most importantly, 0 incidents of prisoner abuse or Geneva Convention violations. Why do you want Germans to read this? Ingrid asked. Because Germany must understand that strength and victory don't require cruelty. Your people need to see that it's possible to build a society based on human dignity rather than domination. As repatriation ships prepared to depart, Ingrid packed her few belongings, including letters from American soldiers' families who had adopted German prisoners through correspondence programs, photographs from camp recreational activities, and certificates from educational courses she had completed. Anna approached her with tears in her eyes. Ingrid, how do we explain this when we get home? How do we tell Germans that American prison camps provided better conditions than our own army gave us? We tell the truth, Ingrid replied firmly. We tell them that we met Americans who proved that human decency isn't weakness, it's strength. That treating enemies with respect makes you more powerful, not less. As the ship carrying German prisoners departed from New York Harbor, Ingrid stood at the rail watching the Statue of Liberty disappear in the distance. She was returning to a destroyed homeland, but she carried with her something invaluable, proof that even in war's darkest moments, some people choose to maintain their humanity. The hot baths, clean towels, and respectful treatment she had received as a prisoner would forever remind her that civilization and barbarism are choices, not inevitabilities. In American prison camps, German women had learned that their enemies possessed the very humanity that their own leadership had abandoned. It was a lesson that would help rebuild not just Germany, but the possibility of a more decent world